Good afternoon. For the record, I am Jessica Kutches, Legislative and Policy Counsel. Today I have the pleasure of presenting with Dr. Maureen McMahon, Deputy Superintendent for Academics and Strategic Initiatives, Dr. Kathy Kubik, Associate Superintendent for School Performance, and Mr. Jason Dykstra, Executive Director of Instructional Data. Collectively, we are going to discuss revisions to the Superintendent's Regulation on Grading. We will review some background and history regarding this regulation, highlight the improvements, clarifications, and philosophy around the changes, and explain how this will be implemented in our schools. In order to meet the needs of students and staff, the grading regulation is a fluid document that has been updated 8 times over the past 13 years. The specific provision related to redos or opportunities for mastery was included in the grading regulation for the first time in 2012. As we promised in the fall when we brought you quarterly assessments, we are now back to you for the specific purpose of amending the grading regulation regarding the redo practice. All other provisions related to the grading policy and regulation are not contemplated for discussion at this time, as these improvements are specifically related to obtaining mastery by redoing certain assignments. In order to provide the enhancements to the regulation that we will discuss today, the concepts and language of the regulation went through an extensive vetting process. First, there was a cross-disciplinary grading committee that met and continues to meet regularly regarding the grading regulation. Throughout the revision process, we met with the CAC, CRASC, the Superintendent's Teen Advisory, the County Council of PTAs, PIAC, principals, TAC, and teachers. I would like to extend a specific thank you to the CAC for their partnership regarding this effort, as they provided an extensive survey with a summary of the feedback that they received from their survey. While we received a lot of feedback, it is important to note that all the suggestions and feedbacks we received may not be seen directly in the regulation, but it is being considered as part of professional development and the implementation of this regulation. As you will notice, we are not recommending any policy changes at this time. So this is the superintendent's regulation, and no vote is required from the board at this time. Now, Dr. McMahon will review the actual enhancements to the grading regulation that will take place next school year.
So as Ms. Kuchis said, ultimately what we're looking for is student mastery of content. So we're trying to align the regulation such that we support students being able to gain this mastery. So we, including all the stakeholders that Ms. Kuchis referred to, we all want students to gain ultimately and reach their ultimate potential through the ability to learn and sometimes relearn the content and then be reassessed on it. So the notion is if the philosophy is one of mastery and one of a growth mindset, we have to have opportunities for students to relearn and be reassessed. So then there are many questions that arise when you say opportunities for reassessment. So what does that really mean? Well, if every learner is unique and every learner learns in a different way, then they also stumble or struggle with different information. And so we have to allow assignments, assessments, projects, we have to allow an open, free choice of what is redone, what is able to be reassessed by each student. Now, of course, that comes with some exceptions. So initially, you say to yourself, is homework able to be reassessed? We would say no. It's about practice. It's about the daily practice. And occasionally a student is sometimes not going to be able to hand in their homework on time or hand in their homework. But that's okay because we only allow homework to count for 10% of a student's grade during a marking period. So the idea is homework, no redo on homework. What about those large projects that have multi-components? Well, what we say is yes. Each of the multi-part components, if they're graded, they're open for redo. But by the end, if there is a cumulative grade given at the end of a large-scale project, that is not open for redo. Then we move on to the items during the last week of the marking period. At that point in time, we're trying to bring closure to things, both in ideas and move towards that quarterly assessment. So items due the last week of the marking period are not open for redo. But we will, and my colleague here, Dr. Kubik, will speak to the fact that professional development will be available such that high-stake items don't fall in that last week of the marking period. And finally, quarterly assessments. Those quarterly assessments are meant to be cumulative, and they're meant to actually assess a student's understanding and their synthesis of a lot of material. So they're not open for redo. However, we are going to go over the quarterly assessments with students. We want them to learn from them, and we want their parents to learn from them. So we will be sending them home, and they're open for discussion, but not a formal redo. So then you may say to yourself, how many? How many opportunities for redo? Well, remember we have, as part of regulations, this notion of at least 9 grades in a marking period. So all the stakeholders and us together came up with no fewer than 3, no more than 5 opportunities during any one marking period. And that'll be determined. Actually, we're empowering the teacher to make good sense and with good sense, make that decision, unless they're part of a team, and then the teachers will get together and make a recommendation and come up with one answer, like an English 9 team. They would come up with 3 assignments for all students in English 9. So if they had Miss Smith or Mr. Jones as a teacher, all English 9 students at any one school would have the same number of redos available to them. And finally, that would be approved by the principal. So once you select strategically what you're going to redo as a student, then how many times can you redo it? Once. The idea is that you know what you struggle with, you'll go to the teacher and maybe get some reteaching or get some suggestions from the teacher of what to learn, what to practice, and then you'll redo the assignment. Now, when you redo that assignment, you may ask yourself which grade counts. The higher of the 2 grades count. The idea is mastery here, and if you stumble again, granted, and we will have some students that this happens to, the idea is that teacher would recommend more work be done. They wouldn't be able to redo again, but the higher of the 2 grades would stand. And when does that have to happen? It has to happen within 10 school days of when the student receives the assignment back graded. So they do have a while to meet with their teacher, come in for help if they can avail themselves of it, or practice at home, and then come back in and submit the new redo assignment for a regrade. And now my colleague, Dr. Kubik, will tell you, how are we going to put this into practice?
So what's this mean for our kids next year? So this is actually pretty neat. Right now, a child is able to redo a certain number of assignments, but it really might depend on where they are in their middle or high school in our county. Are they in the northern part, the southern part? Are they at a middle school, a high school? Do they have Mr. Dykstra for geometry, or do they have Miss Kubik? So it really could depend classroom to classroom. The idea is that next year, kids will know that no matter where they are in the county, no matter what classroom, what course, it's going to be 3, 4, or 5. So teams can work together and the principal can approve. So that's going to mean a new way to think about grades and redos for kids. So it means professional development. The principal will be responsible, obviously, for understanding this policy and supporting teachers to implement it. But what that means for teachers is we have to get kids to advocate for their own grade. Because I need to be able to think, how many do I have in a 9 weeks, and which one do I want to redo? Because as you saw, there's timelines associated. So that's a professional development opportunity as we bring this into the schoolhouse. But on the other side of that, that means we also have the opportunity to tell our parents and kids, this is coming. This is a great way for you as a child to advocate for your grade and for parents to be aware and involved in their child's education. So one tool that we're going to have is the course outline. Curriculum and Instruction has devised a proposed statement that can go in every course outline, and it's the same, again, classroom to classroom, course to course, school to school. And it basically outlines for teachers and kids and parents that they have so many opportunities to redo, and as you see in red up there, this teacher chose 4. So kids will clearly know at the beginning what kinds of assignments, the numbers of assignments, and how many of them they get to redo.
So once a student actually submits and completes a redo assignment and gives it to the teacher, when the teacher is doing their grades, the teacher will actually make a note of the redo grade and the original grade. And what that will do is trigger a symbol or an icon automatically into both the teacher's grade book and also on Parent Connect, and which is where our students and parents can access, kind of up-to-date snapshot of grades. So what will happen in the grade book is if you go onto Parent Connect, either the student or the parent, you will see a little icon highlighted right before you, a little paper sign, and all a student or parent actually has to do is hover over that icon and a box will pop up. The box in front of you says redo score is now a 7 out of 8 and the original score was a 5 out of 8. And then simply looking at the icons, one can quickly see how many redos that I've done in any particular course. And that again is also going to be available. That icon will also automatically appear for the teachers as well in their gradebook software. So how are we going to do this? Well, we start tomorrow. This team will be before the high school principals tomorrow with this presentation, and we will be going over. We've already worked with lots of principals and teachers on the update of this regulation, and we'll continue that. We anticipate and expect that our principals will begin the discussions with their teachers now until the end of the year as we kind of start looking at next year at this time. The Office of Student Data is offering, I believe, 14 different workshops and courses over the course of the summer regarding the grade book and how to account for redos in that. We also have a very robust online system where teachers can go and get directions on how to complete their grade books accurately and also best practices and tips. We're going to develop a video series as well where that would be available for students and teachers and parents, both explaining the philosophy of redos and how they work and also some of the technical parts as well. With that, we thank you very much for your time. We're open to any questions that you have. And we also have a sample video for you, kind of highlighting what we've kind of shared with you here today.
Mrs. Scavage, I have a question about my grades.
Hey, what's going on?
So I earned a 75 on an assessment, and I know I can do better.
Would you like to redo it?
Yeah, I've already done 2 this quarter. Am I allowed to do 1 more?
Yes, if you take a look at your syllabus, you'll see that you can actually do 3 a marking period.
Mrs. Scavage, can I redo homework?
Actually, if you take a look at the syllabus, you'll see that you can't redo homework, quarterly assessments, whole research projects, or anything from the last week of the marking period.
All right, thank you.
You said I can redo this. I got a 75, so what can I do to do better?
Well, let's take a look at your rubric. It looks like your ideas are really strong, but you struggled with the writing portion.
So what type of remediation do I have to do?
Well, we can have you just do the writing portion. You can do just one part of it if you want. Can you come in tomorrow after school?
Yeah.
Hey, I really need to redo my essay, but I can't come in tomorrow. What should I do?
Actually, Megan, I have a handout describing the steps that you can go through on your own.
Okay.
So if you can't make it in, you can still do the remediation.
Okay. What if my second score is lower?
We'll keep the higher score, don't worry.
Okay.
Can I just keep redoing until I get the grade I want?
You can't actually do that. You get 1 redo per assignment.
It was worth a try.
It was.
So when does this redo need to be turned into?
It needs to be turned in 10 days from when the assignment is given back to you.
Okay.
I guess I better get to work then.
Guess so.
Thank you, guys. Mrs. Hummer.
Yes, just to clarify, the video did answer a little bit. So, but it would be, hopefully they're getting remediation and we'll have a higher score with the redo. But if there's not, the higher of the 2 scores will be counted.
Correct.
And let's say, for instance, it's an algebra test and there's 10 questions and they got 5 questions correct and 5 incorrect. For the redo, would they have to redo the entire 10 questions or just the ones that they missed?
It's really up to the teacher at that point in time, but the teacher has the ability to say, you really only you need to concentrate on these areas, and so when you come in, I'm only going to be retesting you or reassessing you on those areas. Or they could say, no, my policy is you're going to take a quiz very much like this one again.
So the teacher has some leeway in there.
They
then.
do.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for all the
Thank
work
you.
that went into this. I know that it took a lot of collaboration and work, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Mrs. Pickard.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you as well. I know this has been a long, long process. And from a parent of, not a new 6th grader anymore, but a 6th grader, I know there's also some folks out there, both in our teaching pool and our parents, that don't think this is a a good idea for whatever reason. And I would just like to say very publicly that I completely disagree. And I've turned the corner myself this year because my child's English teacher and I sort of had a meeting of the minds in September. And then I watched my child advocate for herself, go see her teacher at lunch, get a better understanding of a concept she didn't understand, and improve her grade. And I can't think of a better way to prepare our students for what life is really like. And I know we've used the example of, if not everybody passes the bar the first time, or not everybody passes their driver's license test the first time. And if we're not taking time to give our students the opportunity to get that mastery of a concept, they're not going to succeed as many subjects build on themselves, certainly in math. And I just want to say again, thank you. And I know it's not going to be a simple task to roll it out, but I know you guys will do a tremendous job this summer.
Thank you.
And I know Georgia will be making sure her teachers follow the follow the policy closely.
Dr. Frank.
I'd like to address this to Dr. Kubik with some concern because my children graduated from school when she was there, and I'd like to ask questions kind of on both sides. Question number one is a student may get an A, but he wants to be an A+, and A's not good enough. He wants to get an A+. Can the child take the test again? And then the question on the other side is, well, I just wanted to pass. As long as I get a D, I really don't care. Can I take it again?
So the straight answer is, if the teacher has 3 redos and the child has a 92 and wants to get 100, awesome. If that's one of the 3 redos. And on the other end, if the child just wants to pass, first we're going to have a little chat. But second of all, yes, that could be one of the redos.
Thank you.
Mr. Horskip.
Thank you. I just had one quick question. In the first slide where I gave the timeline of the redo policy, it said June of 2012, the first inclusion of redo. Can you explain what that meant? I might have misunderstood.
Sure. So the grading policy has existed since the beginning date on that slide,
Okay.
But that was the first time that this reassessment provision was added in. So the grading regulation existed without this opportunity for redo until that date.
Okay, so this is when it was put into paper, this is how it happens. Okay, because I was pretty sure
that's when it became official, and Dr. Arlotto was a part of the team when that happened.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it was, if I can jump in, it was 2012 when we introduced that, and there has been some consternation over time as we've implemented. So the concept of redo and mastery is not new. And so it was written into the actual regulatory language back in 2012, and as time has gone on, in consultation with principals and teachers and parents and students, as you're well aware in some of those meetings, we needed to do a better job with the language and a better job with standardizing how this can be done across all of our schools, particularly our secondary schools. And so that's the reason now to bring it back before you with sort of tighter language that is more, we believe will be more readily accepted and easier to standardize and accept across all of our schools.
Thank you. Mrs. Birch?
Yeah, I know that standardization was a big problem because weren't there some schools who would not let you redo it if you had a 90 and other schools would let you redo it if you had a 90? So I could try and get a 99, but if you were at a different school, you couldn't try and get a 99. Right. Okay, but so now everyone's going to know that there's no grade limit on it. Okay.
Right, that's
okay.
correct.
All right.
Mrs. Pickard?
Oh, and I didn't want to leave you out, Mr. Dykstra. Love, love, love the Parent Connect. I'm slightly addicted to Parent Connect, but that will be a huge help keeping up. Thank you.
Mr. Gilliland?
Thank you, and thank you to all of you. I think this is great. My day job, so to speak, is overseeing aspects of our curriculum development process, and I can tell you higher ed is moving in this direction, and as we evolve and do more online, there are certainly a lot of tools that can really validate this with online learning aspects as well. So again, kudos to all of you and best of luck as you start to roll this out. My question is just about equity. And, we've talked a little bit about standardization. And I just want to ask what auditing requirements, if any, are in place to ensure that one school is not skirting the system, so to speak, so that all of our students, as they start to compete for colleges, et cetera, are on a level playing field.
Okay, so I'll field that one. So I want to go back to our students are our best monitoring tool, because if they know there's a policy, and they all will, they're very good at helping us implement the policy. Other than that, we do have, as Mr. Dykstra illustrated, a very easy tool to monitor, and then it would become the school-based administration who would be responsible for making sure that it's happening according to the reg.
And then if I can just ask a follow-up, and some of this we can certainly perhaps even go offline on if need be. For overriding grades, in particular, a teacher enters grade X, we'll use different letters, in this case. Teacher enters X and believes that student really has earned X for the semester, for a particular assessment. Are there overriding mechanisms that administrators can use to increase the grade that a teacher believes a student has earned?
So I guess I'll field that one. I think if there's comes a time where there's a discontinuity in what the teacher believes and what the administrator believes, that's a conversation for those two to have. And in our regulation, it does say we have to have how we determine the final grade. So it would come down to the two of them discussing their belief on what the final grade that the student receives should be.
And looking at artifacts and the documentation that the teacher has put in place during the course of the marking period.
So it's kind of like, and again, forgive the question, I'm thinking higher ed lens,
Mm-hmm.
department chair, dean, type appeal process. Does that exist? A student says, you know what, darn it,
Yep.
my B should be an A, and you teacher looked at this with the wrong lens. Is it a department chair that reviews?
Student to teacher to department chair to, in a secondary school, to assistant principal to principal.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Birch?
That may be something you want to pay more attention to, because I have heard stories from teachers of grades being changed without their knowledge or permission, because they gave zeros because they felt that a zero was warranted because no work was actually done, and an administrator changed it to a 50 because 50 is supposed to be the lowest you can get, but the teacher felt that a zero was warranted because of the absolute lack of effort that went into something. So that may be something that you just want to keep your eyes on.
Absolutely, and thank you for the opportunity to just make a quick comment about that. As you saw from the timeline, this grading regulation we've looked at in pieces because it's so complicated and it's so labor intensive on our administrators and our teachers that we've ensured that we've taken pieces of it. So we did quarterly assessments, as we said we would, in the fall. We did redos now this spring, and as we've discussed before, in this coming up fall, we will look again at the exact concept that you're talking about, zeros to 50%, making sure there's clarity, making sure the implementation is clean, clear, effective for our schools, and then also the way that we honor valedictorians, salutatorians, and the concept of the cum laude system. Mr. Gilliland?
Thank you. Just to dovetail on what Mrs. Burge was saying, I'm glad we're going to have that conversation, and I know it's regulation. You guys are sharing it with us, and that's great. But as just one board member, I would request that we really define and put strong definition and behind good faith effort and what that means, what that entails. And I don't know, again, from a mechanism perspective, give out the syllabus in the beginning of the year or beginning of the term. Do students sign something that says, sort of like the handbook, hey, I acknowledge that this is the syllabus that I received, and I'm going to adhere to my end of the bargain. We're asking teachers to do a lot. I as a student am going to ensure that I provide good faith effort, and if whatever that definition is, certainly with some sub bullets if need be. But if I don't adhere to this, and I don't get good faith effort, then I certainly need to acknowledge that I get a 0 instead of that 50 that seems to be, from what I've heard. I think Mrs. Burgess here and some of the same things I've heard. The 50 seems to be, in some cases becoming the bottom, and that's not what I think it was intended to be when this regulation was done.
The good faith effort, the 0 and the 50, they're all really at the focal point of so many of our early conversations on this topic. So absolutely, those will be in the heart of the mix.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you guys. The visual with the inconsistency on the map in the county, very strong and powerful message that we've been able to.
Thanks, Steve Gray.
Yeah, exactly. And we appreciate that we're trying to move in that direction of consistency. And I think we've heard too from some teachers that they feel like those 95% kids that are trying to get the 100 is creating more work for them because they have to maybe do another assessment, drop another assessment or something like that. But when we remind everybody that they only have 3 or 4 or 5, and you got 10 days to make up your mind, if you're at the beginning of the marking period and you're getting 95s and you're using your redos, you're going to run out of them when you need them, if you need them later on for an 80 or a 75. I just had one quick question about Parent Connect. If I was a teacher that was allowing my students to redo something, 3 or 4 times, the same assignment, will that show up in Parent Connect on the little tab?
No, with the regulation that's in place, I can only redo an assignment one time. So
but as a teacher, I could only input one redo into the system?
No, they could do more, technically, if they're not following the regulation.
Okay, so
nothing prevents them from, they own their grade book, so they certainly could input another score if they wanted to.
And that's something that you all could see in terms of
correct.
Random auditing or something. If that was an
Absolutely,
issue.
yes. There are reports that can be generated with how many
Yeah.
redos a student did or how many redos a teacher has, and absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this item? All right. Thank you all.
Thank you all very much.